These are 8 fantasy trends that, in my opinion, need to go. And let's start with, personally, a pet peeve of mine that it just
drives me crazy, which is
starting with a good idea, with a phenomenal premise, something that has incredibly high stakes at the world building, it's well constructed, like everything, it's flowing, your interest, it's peaked. And then, in the conclusion, either if this is a duology, it's a standalone, or if it's a trilogy, it just ends up in a way that it does not land. And it's so frustrating to me to be so hyped by the book and then just following a story that it does not live up. And yes, I'm talking in standalones at the Priory of the Orange Tree, like phenomenal premise, and then the ending. It's like, what's the need to rush it? You spent already 400 pages explaining me all of this beauty, and then
you just want to wrap this up really quickly.
Also, this kind of happens with Black Sun, which is an underrated fantasy book that I really, really loved. This is part of a series, but the first book is just phenomenal, but the last part, it just ended so quickly that it was like,
what? I think I blinked and it passed.
Also, with this trilogy that it's been hyped, so hyped, Once Upon a Broken Heart, have you heard it? Yes, you have. Book 1 was great, book 2 was phenomenal, and I was like, this is my whole personality now. And when book 3 landed, it was like,
what is happening here?
Like, why we needed to have all of that story in just these pages? I cannot for the life of me understand this. Just, I understand that there's a limit, that sometimes you want to wrap this story because you're already thinking on the next one. And I acknowledge also that the publishing industry is just rushing things up. But there's a thing in quality and in keeping the stories with that element that just drives me crazy. This honestly might be my villain origin story on why I like cozy fantasies, like low stakes. I know already that this is a story that will have low stakes, and I enjoy that. I'm not light from the beginning, and then, I went through that journey and discovered the reality at the end. Let's continue with something that absolutely kills me, which is when the first point of view, it's hiding information from you. So I understand that this has a certain something when you're reading because you are lost and you just are surprised all the time, but I cannot avoid thinking when this happens that the author, in essence, it's hiding information for you for the emotional punch. And I wonder
how this can be done in a way that it's better.
And yes, Red Rising, I'm looking at you. Also, The Lies of Locke Lamora, Witch King. There are a lot of moments, the most emotional ones, in which suddenly the main character had this plan, and because of that, everything was safe. But you spend a fair amount of time thinking that things are going to be lost. And I just don't understand this, because if you're following that first point of view, you're following that person, that character, and it's just like, when this happened, how is it that I'm having these different conversations and you pining over different people and things? Yes, Throne of Glass, I'm looking at you, and then suddenly you have all of these ideas, this secret plan, also Crescent City, like,
why, when, how, no.
The third trend that drives me absolutely crazy, and actually it's more that I'm lost. Have you been in a bookstore lately? Like, books are really, really similar. I am confused if I've read a book already or not. Like, not really, because I know that. But there's overall this feeling that there are covers that kind of like work well, and then you have that book replicated in a lot of different moments. And I understand why it's interesting from the publishing perspective to pitch us something that we liked previously, because there's this bias that we already like what we like, and so therefore if we liked a book that had a beautiful cover, if you kind of replicate that book cover, you might think that that book will be also for you. I get that. But if the book cover does not reflect what the book is about or the vibe, it loses something for me, and
I'm lost there.
Another formal petition to authors. Why teenagers tend to save the world. It's so weird. It makes me feel so weird. So we have these incredibly high stakes, kind of Mistborn. We have even Wheel of Time. There's Malice. There's a lot of things that are about to go down. Things are pending to be resolved. And we have these teenagers being the ones in charge of solving things. And I love the chosen one trope, but this is like not realistic at all in my opinion. And yes, fantasy does not need to be realistic, so I definitely understand that point, but I want also adults saving the world. Therefore, that's why my favorite fantasies are actually driven by adult characters, like Stormlight Archive, we have Sword of K, and yes, I understand that these characters are matured and they are presented to different, very challenging situations and therefore going, but how, like, I would never, ever, ever allow these teenagers to fight and for the presence, for the weight of the world to actually be with them. And it's something that you can see in fantasy romance, in of course young adult, and I love and really understand that this has a purpose because you can see yourself reflected, especially in young adult, in these tropes of finding your space, finding your purpose in life. But at the same time, I really want these adult characters being able to manage stuff. I want these teenagers to be like, yeah, we're just teenagers, let's, we're gonna do these mistakes, but eventually we will ask my elders to help me out. And I really want this more in fantasy. Another little something that I will pass real fast because it is something that maybe it's more related to me and not to everyone, but
I have kind of like an issue with the special editions and special covers.
To me, this is a twofold problem. In one hand, we have a lot of different editions from the same book that are really similar, and then you have, or not, that bonus content. I have already talked about that bonus content and how I feel that's not okay. I will link that video in case you want to check that out. But for different editions, where those editions are really similar, I don't really see the purpose of buying those. It comes to a moment in which there are too many different editions, and also in the other hand, there are those editions that are only available for a selected few. So yes, we might want a certain edition of one of our favorite books to be more beautiful, or even to collect those different editions of the book.
But we cannot really access to them, don't we?
You need to be already subscribed to a lot of different subscription boxes. Fairloot, Allcrate, even the Broken Binding. There are a lot of different sales that I personally will never see because it goes out first to those that are already subscribed, which makes total sense. But at the same time, it feels like there's a gatekeeping thing there. But yes, there's a limited editions. There cannot be like 10,000 million of special book covers for everyone. I understand that. But at the same time, I just wonder, like, why? Because if I want that version, why can't I buy it? Why do I need to think that I need to spend a fixed amount of money per month in order to eventually be able to get to those different books or those different pre-sales that get there? I know this is not consumerism, and that the conversation around the beautiful new editions and all of these hardcover can lead into this conversation of consumerism. I don't necessarily believe that we are at that point. I understand the point of you want your books, and there are options in which now you can have those sprayed edges, and what you can collect, it's more beautiful now than it was before. I think that idea, of course, like without taking things like to an extent. Some people buy for the sake of showing them in the camera, but I don't really believe this is at this point the main thing that is happening. I still believe that the different art covers, it's an opportunity for the artist. I do believe that if we can have books that are beautiful, that's all the better, and that you can collect those beautiful options, I think that's also fine. But of course, we need to be careful about those messages that get sent of, oh, you don't want to lose this last version of this very popular or famous book that you want because of these, or you also want this chapter. Those messages, I think, are a little bit more tricky. In essence, what I think is tricky is that a lot of the population, it's not able to access those beautiful editions unless you pass already to a paywall of certain amount of money each month in order to get access to those books first, which it's a little bit crazy to me to think. Another fantasy trend that needs to go, and I think it's actually going, is that in young adult potentially, or whenever there's a love triangle, we have our beautiful, powerful main character, and that character needs to select, or there's a love triangle between two different people that are kind of like very different. One, it's blonde, and the other one, it's like these dark haired, lilac eyes, and just I love the idea of differentiating characters, but when this idea of having this love triangle of the blonde, the dark-haired character replicated in different books. Yes, A Court of Thorns and Roses, yes, Legendborn, yes, The Black Witch, and I'm sure a lot of others. There's this point in which you're starting to see a pattern in these, and I am...
not loving this.
And for the 7th, we have one that I'm actually really salty about, which is when we have narrators that really are different from the main characters. And I mean, we might be reading a book in which our main characters are younger and we have a narrator that is suddenly really
old or sounds old,
and or a character that it's a child, and then you have these women very sensual just explaining things to you. And I understand obviously that there's a job and that you need to have a certain age in order to perform a job, and also the more you narrate the better you are. But it's very weird to me when I'm listening to a story and I have these characters just talking and discussing, and maybe one of the main protagonists, which in the book has like 20 years, have the voice of like someone that is talking like this, and then we got this and that, because it's like very... It just transports you to another place, right? It's when you're reading, you kind of imagine what you're reading, and when you're listening, the voice and how it is narrated, it also transports you to a place. And I don't necessarily think that this is like a deal breaker in a lot of different books, because the age of the characters is not as important, or it's not as clearly stated, but there's some instances in which you can really see a young or younger character being talked about by an older narrator. And the worst of it is that when they are sometimes kind of like faking that voice, or they're just like, and it's like,
no.
And the last one, and let me know yours down below, I'm all here to discuss this, is essentially I would love books that are either very packed with things that happened, or that between installments and the releases there's a fair amount of time to the next book have a small summary for us readers. Like Crescent City, even The Shadow of What Was Lost, there are a lot of different books that when you start reading book 2,
you're like, what is happening?
My favorite book of last year, The Will of the Many, I'm sure I will need to reread these, because it ends in a way that a lot of things happened, and you need to be
in sync with everything that is happening
in order to understand or pick up this story, especially if the story continues right after, and it's been like 2 years since that last book. You're like, I don't remember necessarily what happened yesterday, and I really believe this should come like as summary of previously on this book, this happened. Cool, then you can move forward. These are the most important things that you need to remember. Like, the author will know this, and I know there are a lot of different series that are created in order for you to binge them, but if you're reading them at the same time that those books are released, chances are you are reading a lot of things in between before those next books come, and you're like lost, which leads to a lot of people needing to reread those first books or the previous books, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
Except that I don't believe that a lot of people have time to reread all of those books.
And don't get me started with covers that change.
Why that happens? I do understand what happens.
And maybe the style of that cover, it's not modern anymore, or it's not up to date or in sync with the cover art of the books that are currently selling. So it makes sense to re-edit those books so that, you know, those books get again a fair chance. I understand that, but
why they need to make them so ugly?
I don't understand. And we see here like Six of Crows, very, very ugly. And also Throne of Glass, No. There's of course a theme of those cover arts that happen as the story is being released, and that leave you with a story that if you bought it from the beginning, it has different art, which is the forever nightmare of a bookworm like me. It happened in the Dandelion Dynasty in the US edition. Now, disclaimer, all of these are just my opinions. I do understand that all of us have different opinions, and there are things that we like, things that we don't. So please let me know your thoughts on these, but bear in mind, we might be different, and I love us for that. And thank you so much to my patrons who joined the Ingwardin Society. We are having a year-long read-along of The Wheel of Time. Join us if you want to have fun. We do also have reading sprints and weekly reading challenges. See you there.